Keno mentioned thanking Caney and Doc for their input. I think, certainly I would have spent a lot more time with Beck, who's equally been involved in development of this. If Caney hadn't sort of pointed me in a few of the right directions and sent through a few of the government regulations and mentioned that the key to what we could do as a sport, with everything being in 2 different states predominantly for the activities, was to not drill down, to not outline exactly the numbers in groups and things like that. This document will be fluid. It will need updating regularly over time. And one of the first points that we really want to stress is that this is not for the professional or the elite level athletes and programs. So everything you see here, that top tier comes under the jurisdiction of Olympic Institute and the Institute programs. So from that perspective, please don't try and take what you see in this and translate that into the other programs that might be there for some members of your club if they're in that top tier. So basically, Beck, you can cue that one on for me. Where we want to get to as well is just sort of saying these are guidelines, what we're putting forward. It's recommendations. It's based. I'll talk about in a minute where we've pulled most of this information. But if you're not going to use them, just be able to or be prepared in your decision making and to follow through and just say why you didn't use it. I mean, some things will have an impact if you can't do it, but there'll be other things where the guidelines or recommendations might relate to access to facilities or things that your club does not have and does not operate during the season. So there will be some things in here that you flick past and go, look, that's not us. But there are other things that if you are going to stray from it, please just sort of be mindful and be ready to document why you're not doing that if something does unfortunately arise throughout. We also are aware that these things are pretty onerous, but this, unfortunately, it is the new normal for everyone. It's there's people that get angry. They sort of say, "Why have we got to do all these things?" It's not a choice anymore. Unfortunately, the government put these restrictions in place. It's in the best interests of everyone involved. But what we're trying to do is all work together so that we can speed up the process. As Colin mentioned earlier, to have a season, but part B of that is to try and give our athletes a chance to be back on snow and training and at least have some form of event experiences if they can be arranged during the season. Moving through to the next slide, we've got Beck. So our guidelines and protocols. So part of this, we had to work with Sport and Rec Victoria to get these assessed, and they've been approved by the expert advisory panel that they've instituted in New South Wales. We have different reporting requirements, so we haven't pursued all of that. Where we have based the bulk of this document is on the Snow Australia guidelines, the AIS and Sport Australia guidelines, and also the Sport and Rec Victoria guidelines for return to sport. As we are a national sporting organisation, we've taken the top tier approach with a lot of these documents, and the information that's been provided is really there to benefit all of Australia. Where that then relates is what Caney mentioned earlier, is the varying state government regulations and restrictions that are in force. I think when Caney and I first started speaking about this version of the document for the community level, he mentioned something like, Steve, this is restrictions level 6. We're going to be at 9, 10 or 11 pretty quickly, and that has been evolving along the way. So I think there's notice today from New South Wales Sport that there'll be competitive sport available for 18 and over from the 1st of July. So things that hadn't been in place are now getting announced, and they're always there's been this awareness now that they need to keep sport engaged and to be able to notify that there's a roadmap and assign some dates to those things. So we're always looking out for those. What we can say to you is you need to also be mindful of whatever the state government is saying. At the end of the day, there's the resorts that basically are the ones that control the, for want of another term, the football fields and that sort of thing for what we are as a sport, and everything that that works in our favour as a sport has to be relatable and approved in the guidelines and also the restrictions that the resorts are operating within. So we can take what the AIS and Sport Australia put forward, but how that translates to the environment that you work, we as the sport don't control that. So that's why there might not be, or there might be some references in here that don't relate directly to the environment that you're operating in with your relationship with the various resorts. And of course, they're split over 2 states and multiple ownerships and directors involved in that as well. So we've done what we can to really provide sort of protocols and guidelines that will be relevant to your community environment for the safe operation of your programs during the winter. I'll throw over to Beck now. I think Beck's going to sort of come through the next slides, and I'll come back to you shortly on some.
Yeah, thanks for that, Steve. So yeah, I'm going to start off by sort of stepping through the 5 steps of to be snow ready that is outlined in the document. This really just overviews the requirements, the recommendations and considerations that the clubs should be looking at when they're putting together a club COVID-19 safe plan. Steve and I will also be touching into the resources that are at the back of the document and sort of see where that links into each of the steps. So the first step is on the screen. So obviously that is to appoint a COVID-19 liaison officer or create a team. Ultimately, they oversee the development and implementation of the plan. They need to be able to stay up to date with all the changes and the requirements that both Kaney and Steve have mentioned that continuously change through this process. And most importantly, they need to be a point of contact for not only for your club and your club community, but a point of contact for the resorts, for any government officials or anything that needs to come, that may happen for us as from Snow Australia. So if you do have your COVID-19 liaison officers for your clubs, can you please email them to me? If I don't have their email addresses, provide that as well. So that way Steve and I can actually send stuff through if stuff comes past our desk directly to those officers or teams. They need to be able to ensure that everything's implemented correctly as well and continuously check on it during the season, work with the staff, the volunteers to ensure that what you have in your plan is actually being implemented and upheld during the season. Everyone loves to do a bit of training. So the COVID-19 infection control training is something that's probably really important for your club to undertake. It's about a 30-minute government online course, and it really goes through what is COVID, the signs and symptoms, looks at how you can keep yourself safe and protect others. It also looks at a couple of myths and busts some of those for you. We really recommend that at the very least, the COVID liaison officer undertakes it, as well as the club leadership, whether that's your directors or whether it's the manager that oversees your program. The staff, including all the coaches, we really feel should also take this course, and the main volunteers. So those volunteers that are in the club that are on helping out day to day. We also think it's a great way to share with your club community and encourage your parents and athletes to undertake it as well. There is a section at the end that is a little bit of a knowledge check or a bit of a test at the end. And it does provide a certificate. So in part of your record keeping around your plan, I would be requesting that everyone that completes this plan to forward that certificate through and to keep it on records throughout the season. The next step 3, is really looking at understanding the organisation and operational requirements. This has about 6 items that your club liaison officer really needs to understand and review through this process. So obviously that person does need to have a pre-COVID-19 idea about your club and program structure. There's not much point putting someone in that position that didn't understand how your club operated previously from COVID-19. The AIS framework, Steve and Kaney have touched on earlier, but this is a framework that has come from the AIS, and it's really based on 15 principles that look at contact and non-contact sport for grassroots to high performance. So this is evident. This is in the document as resource 1 and really connects into this idea of understanding what those requirements are. Within the framework, we've actually cut out sections that kind of are relevant to snow sports for you as a bit of an overview. So that looks at general hygiene measures, spectators, and also winter sports specific requirements. Within that, there's about 3 levels. So there's level A, level B, and level C, which looks at how you can return to sport as you progress through those levels and as the government releases where we're actually at. The third step is really understanding around other government and public health authority requirements. So in resource 2, we have provided a table that links through that provides links to all those websites where you can find that information. It also has additional resource links, which provides some templates that you can use, information about the COVID app, about the training, and just things that you can actually implement into your Snow Safe plan that helps your club be able to make your club safe for use. The fourth one is obviously we can't do much without working with our resorts and working to their requirements and their protocols. So understanding that and having your liaison officer work closely with your resort to make sure that they're implementing all the checks and balances that your resort requires as well. The other one is really based around this document. So with the Snow Australia recommendations for clubs and programs. This is sort of represented in the resource 3, which Steve and I will touch on shortly. But before we do that, I just wanted to bring attention to the Kovan Safe App. This app is something that you should look at to implement within your plan, encourage your community, your club community to actually download it and use it as a day-to-day resource. So that way, if there is any contact, there's a bit of tracing, easily tracing involved, which doesn't ultimately affect your club in the long term. So just moving on then to, we're just going to quickly cover the resource 3 between Steve and myself. And this is really recommendations from us, from Snow Australia, around what you could do within your club and program environments to minimise risk. There's 2 sections to this. There's organisational and operational considerations. So the organisational considerations is really around that liaison officer, around the clubs and governance, and making sure that their governance, their reporting requirements and structure is actually where it should be, considering your COVID plan. Also looks at the risk review or your risk management around that, and of course your financial sustainability. So within that resource, there's a number of things to consider when putting together your COVID safe plan. Sort of touching on what Kaney just referenced around your scenario planning, within our document, we recommended that you do scenario planning for at least level B and C, and also to cater for any disruptions that may occur during the season, even if you're going ahead, if you have some contact tracing or something and your club needs to shut down, to make sure that's in your considerations as well. And obviously to what Kaney just said about the dates and that level is really important. And also your employees and volunteers, understanding what resources you need to support your staff and coaches to be able to deliver, and we'll touch on some templates shortly and things based around that. And also your COVID-19 safe plan, your education and communication, not only to your community or your board, but to resorts, to Snow Australia, and to everyone else that you need to think about when you're communicating and educating around what you as a club plan to do. I'll just hand back over to Steve to go through this section.
Okay, thanks, Beck. Look, I think you'll agree that we are so fortunate to have Kaney on this today. He's lived and breathed and slept through this whole process more than anyone we've been able to access. So we're fortunate that we have that knowledge sharing going on. Now, with the guidelines and protocols, when many of you might have looked at this document, you've probably looked at this section and thought, look, these guys are going over the top here. What is this all about? I was speaking with Keno before, and Keno and I both involved with the same footy club. And just to give you an idea, this is not unique to winter sports. It's not unique to just the resort environment. This is something that every sport is going through at the moment. And if many of you haven't been involved with some other community level sport with kids and things like that at the moment, at the footy club we're at, I coach. We've had to sit through hour-and-a-half briefing sessions. All the adults, the parents and children have had to sit through online briefing sessions to do participant forms to get ready for the training environment. We're not even at contact training or anything else. So bear in mind that this is not unique to what we're doing. It's something that's mandated for everyone to follow through. So we've mentioned that we've taken the bulk of the items that are relevant to the club environment for snow sports and to the sport environment for snow sports and added these in to this document. Where applicable or where required, we've interpreted with a snow sports club focus or a lens over the top and relied heavily on the experience that Beck's got or some of the other people around our sport have got to interpret this to make sure we're actually putting something of value into this document for the clubs. Final point on this slide is just making sure that it's imperative that people do work through these items, differentiate between the ones that are relevant to you, and if they're not, by all means gloss over them. But I think one of the key things here, as Beck moves slides as well, is Beck just sort of mentioned what you can do for your workforce, but one of the things you want to do is really have some contingency planning. I mean, the easy way to interpret all of this is to assume that it's always going to be an athlete or a child that comes in and says they're sick and not feeling well for the day. What I would encourage everyone when they're doing is to really throw down some strong and well-backed contingency plans that you can roll out very quickly, because what are you going to do if the coach wakes up that morning and they've got some of the symptoms or they're not feeling well? You can't encourage every other athlete to stay away and then turn up and you've said to this coach, you're going to have to coach today because we've got no one else to take this group. So I think from the outset, for all the clubs, you really need to stress the level of expectation, both in terms of not turning up if you've got symptoms, but also be prepared that if something happens on the day, that program might not run. And for parents to embrace that with the right spirit and to be on your side as a club and be open about it. Because I think to get through the season, it's not going to be every day is a great day. We all know what we get at the ski resorts and the sport. So just be mindful of that. Really have layers of contingency planning, because you might have, if someone does have symptoms, you might have to flick a switch and shut down the whole club operation that afternoon. So it's like school, send kids home with laptops every night now because school might not be open tomorrow. These are the same things that you might have to sort of plan for with club activity. So some of the key items we've mentioned need to be adhered to, some don't. When we gave this document to Ryan Taylor, he makes us all look good in the office, and he's done a great job to put this into a beautiful design that he's included an implementation checklist where it's appropriate. So what we've done is try and split up each of the key topic areas with considerations and implementation checklists so that you can work through those. It's something that if you're printing it out, you can just sort of tick off as you go along and say, look, we've actually looked at that, or put a cross next to it and say, and keep a note, maybe keep a note of why you didn't do it or why you did, because 2 months down the track during the season, you might come and go, well, why didn't I see that one in there? But if you've got this as your document, your Bible you're working through, utilise it as best you can. Ryan's done a great job to sort of help us out with some nice little circles and things like that to make it easy for you as you go through. Back onto the next one there. So I think we've jumped a slide there, have we, Beck? Or
No, it's my slide. Oh yeah, we did jump. Sorry. Yeah. There you go.
That's all right. So these are just outlining to you. I'm not going to run through all of these, but the key areas that we've addressed, a lot of this is based on the AIS and also Sport and Rec guidelines that we needed for approval of the return to play document. So then encourage you all to read through and get as many sets of eyes on there. And one last thing on this point that I would say to you is, if this is all about trust. So I would stress to you, if you've got a coach out there that's not going to do the sign-ons, he's not going to do it, get on his case. Don't let them bring your whole club down because they're tardy with what they're doing. Similarly, the best person you can put on a job like this as a COVID officer is someone with an auditor mentality, that they're not going to let 1 cent get past them. That's the type of person that I would encourage you as a club to really put on this job, because at the end of the day, there may be rollback, there may be anything going forward, and someone may get sick. We haven't had a great track record in our sport and industry with what happened overseas. The media seemed to love it early on, so just be prepared, and that's all I can sort of stress to you about this. Really get as many sets of eyes, get as many people on your committee or your board to embrace this, and don't sit there and go, golly, this is just too hard. How are we going to do this? Just sort of sit there and go, hey, let's split it up. Let's work out how we can do it. Let's be creative, and we get everyone to buy in as quick as you can, from the parents, the officials, the volunteers, everyone at your club. Get them to have the same buy-in that you want them to have around the committee table to make everyone's life easy. So, Beck.
Great. Okay, so step 4. Thanks, Steve. Step 4 is now being able to develop a COVID safe plan to be snow ready. So this addresses the key points below. They're in the document, but points of looking at how to deal with the points of transmission risk, controls, hygiene behaviour requirements, physical and fitness preparations before restart, education, and of course the COVID Safe app. So those items should be in your safety plan, ready to go as points of the main points to look at. There is a AIS COVID-19 safety plan template. It is in the document in that resource too that you can choose to click on. It's also on the Snow Australia website where Snow Ready is sitting. That's a good starting point when you're putting your plan together, so you don't have to start from scratch. Other considerations when you're looking at putting your COVID safe plan together is that you need to identify points of transmissions of risk within your club and your program environment, and actually have protocols on how you're actually going to look to make that a safe environment for your athletes and your club community. You need to look at the reboot framework around that level B and C, having those scenario planning so that you're ready for whatever comes your way. Other considerations is required learnings from step 3 around the government and public health requirements, the resort requirements, and of course implementing that COVID Safe app. The other side to your COVID Safe plan, which we haven't really touched on before, is that record keeping and resources. So it's important to make sure you're recording everything that's happening, whether it's your attendance or the templates that you're doing for your coaches. So if there is something that occurs, you can easily go back and check where they actually have had that contact. There is communication resources in that resource 2 table that I spoke about earlier. So when people come into clubs, it's really important to make sure that there's a one-way, there's arrows to actually show that one way, there's signs to show that the community knows that they can't enter or only athletes can enter, to just reinforce continuously what your plan is about. There is a Snow Australia toolkit with some of these resources, which Steve will go through shortly. The other thing that's really important to document is a plan for exposure for COVID-19. So what it means if you have to shut down, what's your community protocols around that, informing people, and obviously working with governments if they're doing contact tracing or something like that. So having a little bit of a plan to understand what your club would do is really important. So I'll just hand back to Steve and he'll just quickly go through the templates.
done the cardinal sin there and left myself muted. Sorry about that. The main thing there is we've got some additional templates we've put on the website. We've linked off to some of the Sport Australia or AIS ones as needed. I think we've also interpreted a couple of dryland training type checklists as well. But again, just all I can stress is get the right people involved and probably don't be rushed into how quickly you are going live with your programming and things like that. If you're not ready, take another day, take a few more hours before you circulate the information. Do what you can to be as ready and right to go as you can. And then Beck will just move forward one more slide for me there. There's been some questions about the attendance register, and certainly, you know, in the environment we all operate in on snow, you can't sort of stand there some days with a piece of paper trying to get people to sign in, sign out, share a pen, do all of those sort of things. So trying to identify ways that you can do it. We've been working, I was shown some Google Forms that are being used at a footy club level on the weekend. We're interpreting those into a Snow Australia type of application, and that's something that we're more than happy to share with people if you want to go down that path, and that logs everything into a Google sheet that you've got a permanent record there of times that we're starting the session, finishing the session, who was there. They've answered yes to the 3 questions they need to answer, etc. The other one that was promoted on news the other night is Team App, and they've got their attendance tracker that's specifically able to work in the COVID-19 situation, and I think AFL Victoria have jumped on board with that, because I think one of the guys who's a founder is an ex-AFL player. So that's just something that there are some free resources that you can work through to do this. It doesn't all have to cost money. You don't have to necessarily reinvent the wheel, and find, if you're having troubles, sort of reach out to Beck or myself, and we'll see what we can find out as solutions to assist you through this sort of space, because obviously the whole club environment is going to be operating similarly, and we'd like to sort of encourage where possible that if ideas come in, maybe this little COVID-19 officer group that Beck's sort of trying to establish a bit of a list of contacts, we can circulate some of these things to assist all clubs going forward as quickly and seamlessly as possible. So, yep. Thanks for that. I'll be around for questions in a minute, but Beck's going to close it out, I think.
Yep. So the final step is step 5, is the communication and implementation. So once your plan is ready to go, obviously it will need to go past your club leadership for approval, and also your resort at the first instance. So, and once it's approved, you need to communicate the plan and how you're going to implement that to staff and your coaches. So there'll be some educational aspects around that. And then once all the staff's up to date, everyone knows what they're doing, then go further with your club community and make sure they're aware of what they can do, what they can't do, protocols for drop off, equipment, everything like that. So when your program does start, the community knows what they should do. The last thing is implementation, and this is around preparing your club space. If you have a clubhouse, around the flooring, arrows, the signs and things like that I spoke about earlier. It's also setting up about templates that Steve just touched on, and also setting up an area where you can record and you can keep all this information so it's easily accessible, not just to you, but to a couple of people within your club, so that if you're not contactable, others can actually access it and be able to provide information as required. Finally, yeah, so that's the Snow Ready guidelines.
Katie, there's a question there, and I'd encourage, if anyone's got any questions now, I think we'll deal with, we'll sort of address those now. And I know in the agenda we've got some other things to get through, but I think this is kind of the main focus for tonight. So if there's any questions, I'd suggest you type them in to the chat now. But Katie, there's a question there on your thoughts on daily temperature checks from Sue.
So at the high performance elite professional sport level, in the current level of restriction, we are obliged to provide daily temperature checks. Well, actually session temperature checks. And so anyone wanting to enter an institute facility or a daily training environment right now, as an elite or professional sports person, they have to have their temperature checked. These are being done with infrared thermometers. We sourced some via a website called Vital Start. They were just over $100 each. They take 2 to 3 weeks to arrive, so season could be over by the time you get them. But also we might find that in the next level of restriction easing, that in fact might be the first one to go, because the temperature check is not holding up to the rigor that it was expected to when it was recommended by our biosecurity and infectious disease people. So for now, elite sport requires the session temperature checks. It's not something that's required at the community level.
Excellent. So look, maybe what we'll do now. Thanks, Steve and Beck. As I think everyone can see, great job. Enormous amount of work in a short amount of time. And Ryan, thank you as always for pulling that together in an easily and pleasingly digestible manner.